Hello everyone, this is Guy. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss out on more interesting stories. Settle in and get comfortable, because we're starting now. Have you heard from your ex since your divorce? One of the women at the table asked Brooke while sipping her wine from a beaded glass. The ladies were comfortably sitting on the terrace of the Travelers Inn. Brooke Paquette pondered the question before answering, "No, since I threw him out and served him with the divorce papers and the restraining order, I haven't seen or heard from him. He tried to talk to the children, but they ignored him after I explained what he did to us." Ally, a newcomer in the group, wondered out loud, was it a bad break? I sense that there still is a lot of pain. When was the divorce? A year ago. The asshole fought it for a year. When he noticed that the children didn't want anything to do with him anymore, he just gave up, signed the papers and left. But altogether, having been gone for 2 years now. Good riddance, Brooke said with venom in her voice. The next question from Ally was obvious. Why did you divorce him, you mean? Because he was cheating on me with his first love, Gemma Evans. From behind they heard a voice saying, "Jake Van Dam, cheating? No way. He isn't built like that. And as far as cheating with me, I would remember that. Don't you think? Impossible, utterly impossible. I just think that you are up to one of your little dirty games again, Mrs. Brooke Paquette." Brooke's head swiveled around so fast that the others thought that her eyes popped out of her head. She said, well, look what the cat brought in. You have nerves. Look who's talking. You started to manipulate Jake when we were still together. Your lies made us break up, and you have the gall saying that Jake cheated on you with me? When, for fuck's sake? Gemma retorted. 2 years ago, as you know very well. If Brooke's voice had claws, Gemma would be dripping blood. Oh, no. If I had sex with Jake, I would have remembered, wouldn't I? 2 years ago, I was 5,000 miles away, in Edinburgh, Scotland, studying general linguistics and tutoring non-English students. And I can substantiate that with more proof than you can prove that you are here at the moment. I'm back for a week now after being 3 years across the pond, and before that I was teaching at a high school on the other side of the country. Brooke went white. That scenario wasn't what she envisioned, and very bad news for her. If it wasn't Ms. Evans, then who was it your ex cheated you with? Brooke, now cornered, bit her. He cheated on me and I threw him out. Gemma wasn't finished and retorted, and I think that in the tar and feathering process you made it impossible for him to live here anymore. I reckon that even his parents were fooled by your antics. I for one don't believe for a second that he cheated at all, but that he was onto you. Are those children his? One may wonder. But I must leave. Things to do, people to talk to. Jake's parents, for instance. Brooke went white again. Don't you dare. I'll make your life a miserable hell here. Gemma looked coolly at the once gorgeous woman, smirked and said, "Life hasn't been treating you gently, has it? You're needing way too much makeup to make yourself presentable. Anyway, don't get your feathers up, you might get them tarred all by yourself. But I am duty-bound to pay a visit to your ex-in-laws and tell them that I have an alibi for the whole sordid cheating incident. I bid you farewell." Gemma walked to the exit and turned around one last time. "Brooke, Jake didn't cheat, and I'm going to put some things straight. Thank you for throwing him away. He is going to be mine as soon as I find out where he is." About your threat? Don't make me laugh. Tomorrow, I leave for my new job, never to return to this viper's nest. Now go suck lemons. With that, Gemma walked to her car and went straight to the Van Dam residence. =====. The stately house was exactly as she remembered. 3 parking slots at the gate. Just behind the gate, 2 giant ginkgo biloba trees, planted by Jake's great-great-grandparents when they married and had the house built. The long-shadowed walkway to the house and the 3 white granite steps to the door. Gemma got out of her car, opened the boot to take out her laptop and walked to the door. She knocked and waited. The door opened and Jake's grandfather opened the door. "Yes, young lady?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Van Dam. I'm Gemma Evans. Do you remember me? It's been a long time. Yes, I remember you. Wasn't your name mentioned with that unpleasantness with Jake's marriage? Yes, sir, I'm here to tell you that it was impossible that Jake could have an affair with me. I can prove that I was in Edinburgh at the time. The old man looked at Gemma with piercing eyes, weighing her words. Gemma felt as if her soul was laid bare by those eyes. Finally, he said, "Call me Rufus." The older one, he said with a twinkling in his eyes. Yes. It is good and brave of you to come. My son and daughter-in-law are convinced Jake is the culprit. Me? Not so. He isn't capable of that. May I ask why you want to prove his innocence? Gemma had a strong suspicion there and then that this man would spot any lie coming out of whomever and that lying to this man demeans him, and herself in his eye, so she replied truthfully, "Jake doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to be the next Mrs. Van Dam. But first I must find him." You don't accidentally happen to know where he is, do you, Mr. Van Dam? The old man's eyes sparkled with mischief when he replied, "He doesn't have any contact with his parents, nor his brother and sister, and I promised him to tell no man that he is in St. Christopher's Crossing, doing very well for himself at the university over there. But I can't be wrong when I say that you are a beautiful woman and not a man. This is our little secret now. Don't spoil the fun." "No, sir. I'll let you in on another secret. That same university offered me a job and I accepted, so I'm bound to run into him anyway." Somewhere from the back of the house sounded a voice, "Dad? Who is it? Don't let them sell you something you hear." The old man grinned and said to Gemma, "You know where the kitchen is?" Gemma nodded, but when she turned around, she almost walked into Jake's mother. "You have guts," she shouted, "ruining my son's marriage and then walking into this house uninvited. Out with you." Jake's granddad immediately interfered, growling, "Anna, she is my guest and I will hear her out. She claims to be abroad during this whole dirty business." Anna Van Dam immediately deflated, looking at Gemma. "What? I don't believe you." Gemma hefted her laptop, smiled at the old man and said, "I'll show you." An hour later, a very distraught mother and an extremely angry old man were looking at Gemma. "What now?" Anna whispered. Gemma, again, decided on the truth again. "I don't know. Tomorrow, I leave this cesspool. Jake and I were fast friends and well on our way to becoming an item, if that's the proper description. That was, until Brooke inserted herself." Gemma told her story of how she lost her friend and soulmate to Brooke. She didn't divulge her suspicions about the sudden pregnancy. That was for Jake if she could find him. Anna was appalled by the machinations of the mother of her grandchildren, and she decided that her husband, Jack Jr., needed to meet this woman too. Sweetly she asked, "Would you like to stay for dinner, my dear? I'd also like you to tell this tale of woe to Randall, my husband." Gemma declined, politely stating that she had to get ready for her trip to her new job. She pointedly refrained from telling Anna where her new job was. Equals. When Gemma said her goodbyes, Anna took her apart for a moment. Gemma, when, or if you find Jake, will you let us know? It seems we made the wrong decisions and treated him quite poorly back then. I dearly want my youngest back. Gemma gently replied, "If, or better, when I find him, I will pass the message, but it's not in my remit to disclose his whereabouts. Jake disappeared with a reason and it's obvious that he doesn't want to be found." With that she walked to her car. Halfway she saw a man coming up. "Shit, Jake's brother," flashed through her mind. She observed the man. This man was way over his prime, getting very fat. A rolling gait like a gorilla, and he looked like one too. Heavy jowls, thick neck, wide shoulders, arms wide as if he couldn't get them parallel to his body as ought to, a prominent paunch, small steps with two thick upper legs chafing together, wheezing like an old steam engine. Rufus Van Dam took a good look at the slender dark-haired woman. He thought the woman looked familiar but couldn't place her. She needs bigger tits. Those B-cups don't do it for me, but what a pair of legs. Those I would like to feel wrapped around me. He walked inside and met his granddad. "We've had a visitor?" I noticed that broad walking to the gate. Rufus Sr. kept his face carefully blank, saying, "Yes, that was an old friend of Jake, wanting to reconnect. But we don't know where he lives, do we? That good for nothing, cheating son of a bitch." Young Rufus said while thinking, "Lay it on thick, I still need him out of the way, and as far away as possible in every aspect." He went up the stairs, straight into his apartment, especially created for him after his accident within the house. Brooke, in the meantime, was pondering her life. When the divorce came through, Jacob, better known as Jake, was 35 and she was 2 years older. Their children were 16 and 15. They were born within the year. It wasn't the case that they met each other. Brooke had noticed the then 18-year-old boy when finishing a 10-kilometer swim race. First, she didn't deign him a second look until that dark-haired girl came up to him and started to help him out of his wetsuit. That got her attention. Suddenly he looked gorgeous. She observed the pair closely. The boy had reddish-brown, cropped hair, green eyes set in an oval FACE with a defined nose over generous lips. Broad shoulders, long strong arms with broad wrists and hands with long slender fingers. Narrow hips and very muscled legs completed the picture. When the girl started to towel him dry and he raised his arms, she noticed his muscles rippling. Later she heard that Jake had a swimmer's physique. Lots of strong muscles under a thin layer of fat, just thick enough to hide how strong he actually was. There and then she decided that she wanted him and started to plan how to do that. That the girl probably was his girlfriend wasn't going to hold her back. It took Brooke 6 months to break through the barriers of the shy man. Luck had it that his friend, who wasn't his girlfriend yet, was moving out of town, and it became much easier to manipulate the girl out of her way. Finally, Jake asked her to meet his family at the monthly family barbecue. Brooke now knew that he was the youngest of 3 and a late addition to the family. His brother was 6 years older and his sister 4. At the barbecue she looked in astonishment at the 2 brothers. They both were the same height, had the same color hair and about the same face, but that was where the similarity stopped, and the differences became obvious. Rufus had at least 60 pounds on Jake. Where Jake was elegantly built without an overly obvious musculature, his brother was built like a brick house with big heavy bulging muscles. Also, where Jake was reticent and took his time to formulate an answer and spoke softly in measured tones, his brother was all bluster, boom, and superficial with a lot of show. Rufus noticed the handsome girlfriend of his stupid little brother. He despised the little brat. He found him much too clever for his liking. He decided to pay some extra attention to the young woman, some loving attention. It took Rufus 2 weeks, a lot of presence and attention to have Brooke on her back and very willing in a decent hotel. An hour later it was over. Brooke was dazed and very thoroughly fucked. This was quick and brutal, and he took her in every orifice she had. It was nothing more than plain animal fornicating, and she was so overwhelmed that she forgot the condom, though Rufus didn't. Condoms were for wimps. Real men always went bareback. A month later she realized that she missed her period. When she confronted Rufus, he laughed in her face, saying to her to fuck his brother with his little weenie and tell him it's his, or find a doctor to abort it. Should have taken the pill, stupid bitch. He told her in the end. Brooke opted for the first. She seduced Jake and was taken aback at the difference between the 2 men. Jake was a real lover, whereas his brother just took his fun without any consideration for her satisfaction. Another big difference was that Jake was very well endowed while his brother just was an average 5 inches. Rufus also had erection problems sometimes. The pills he took to enhance his prowess in the gym had the opposite effect on the prowess in bed. But that was something she learned a lot later. The only men Brooke had been with was her first boyfriend and Rufus, but since Rufus, she thought she could easily handle Jake in bed. Brooke was naked lying on the bed of the same hotel room she had been with Rufus the first time. At first Brooke wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. Jake had other plans altogether and took his time. He licked and sucked her through 3 screaming orgasms. When she was lying, completely spent, next to Jake, her hand went exploring. When she reached his shorts, she couldn't believe what she was feeling. Oh my lord! He's big. How is this thing ever going to fit inside me? She felt more than a little afraid when Jake went into the bathroom and came back with a damp cloth and tenderly wiped her face. "Where have you learned to do that to a woman?" Jake smiled and replied, "I listened to my girlfriends and learned." "That makes everything somewhat nicer for you, don't you think?" Brooke slowly recuperated while toying with that big one-eyed snake. "It's so hard and that mushroom is going to tear me apart, but I have to do it." She was anxious to get it over with, but her courage failed her. Suddenly she didn't have a choice anymore. Jake pulled her on top of him. Softly he said, "You drive." She felt the top pushing against her entrance. To her surprise, she was still sopping wet. Obviously, her body had a mind of its own and made ready for the invader. She bent over on her elbows and knees. Jake immediately made use of the opportunity to massage her hard, hooded pleasure point. Brooke started to moan when the big bulge started to stretch her. Amazed at herself that she took the big cock fairly easily, and she started to enjoy the feeling. She toppled over so she could kiss him, while he fondled her breasts. Brooke moaned in his mouth when he slowly started to move with long deliberate strokes. When he pushed himself inside, he touched her cervix just enough to add a jolt as an extra to her pleasure, and on the backstroke the hard rim slid along her little oversensitive stamp inside. Every time that happened, jolts of electricity shot directly into the pleasure center in her brain. Brooke was transported into her own private heaven. She lost all sense of time and location. She became aware that she was on her back, her legs around Jake's middle, ankles crossed, holding onto him for dear life. "Oh, this is going to be big," was the only thought that came to mind when she felt another orgasm building up and rolling in. And like in an avalanche, she was swept up and tossed around in wave after wave of physical delight. She wasn't even aware that Jake shot rope after rope of hot semen deep into her cunt. When Brooke came down from the sexual bliss, she suddenly needed the bathroom. She rolled to the side of the bed and wanted to stand up. Her knees buckled and she fell back to the bed. Immediately Jake was beside her, put an arm around her and walked her to the bathroom. He helped her to the toilet, and when she was done, he put her under the shower, taking care that she didn't fall. That done, he toweled her dry and brought her back to bed again. Only after that he went into the bathroom to attend to himself. That interlude gave Brooke time to think. "My dear heavens, what the heck just happened to me?" Her thoughts kept on coming. "I can get used to this. Better still, I can get used to that man over there taking a shower. He is twice, no, thrice the lover his brother is, and a much, much better person." When Jake, after 20 minutes, returned from the bathroom, Brooke had fallen for the gentle, kind and caring man. The idea that he was a boy was wiped from her mind. She decided that she wanted her cake and wanted to eat it as well. Jake as the main dish and Rufus for the spice and dessert. 3 months later, Jake and Brooke were married in a small ceremony, and ever since Brooke was as happy as a clam in its shell. She had a doting husband and bad boy as a lover. Jake was wonderful in bed and a good provider too, and she had her lover on the side. Just for the quick and dirty sessions of plain straight fornicating. Rufus was so small, his discharge so little, and it was over so quickly that even his smell didn't linger. That she didn't always get off didn't bother her at all. She got her kick out of the fact that she got away with it. 13 years later, his lifestyle caught up with him and disaster struck for Rufus. The prolonged and abundant use of muscle-enhancing substances finally presented its bill, and it was a steep one. His heart. In the gym he just bowled over, and his luck was that there was a nurse exercising next to him. Immediately the man started to resuscitate him. He kept going until the ambulances arrived and an automatic CPR machine was slotted over Rufus in the ambulance. Arriving in the hospital, and after a few quick tests, the doctors concluded that he had a myocardial rupture caused by prolonged and excessive use of anabolic steroids. He went straight in for surgery. Rufus was discharged from the hospital as a man in a different body. The prominent musculature was gone. He was flabby and in a very bad condition. He soon realized that he would need constant care and for a long period. Over the months he started to work on Brooke. Belittling Jake, telling Brooke that she mustn't accept the financial restrictions and must demand that Jake increase his income, that she deserved better, and he, playing the victim and exaggerating his suffering. Slowly his campaign had an effect. Brooke started to change her behavior towards Jake, and not for the best. She started nagging him. First, the little annoyances of everyday life would be enough to set Brooke off. A little later she wanted her own car because that old piece of junk was not something she wanted to be seen in. Brooke didn't notice what it did to Jake. On the other hand, she never had pushed him so hard so far. She was broadside when Jake just walked away in the middle of a prolonged rant. The children already fled the room, wondering out loud when Dad would stop taking the punches. "Come back here!" she screamed. "I'm not done with you. Come back, you hear?" Jake just walked into his little office, shut the door, and turned on his laptop. A few minutes later Brooke entered the office. Jake looked up and roared, "Get the fuck out of here!" That moment Brooke knew that Jake had reached his breaking point, and if she kept pushing, he would retaliate. What she, after being almost 15 years married to Jake, still didn't understand was that he was one of those men who kept absorbing the punches beyond breaking point. Only until his toes were over the edge of the ravine he would spring back and react. When that happened with these men, they started to fight back and went nuclear without any warning. Jake looked into the tear Brooke ripped into his soul and found that it was too deep. He had enough. He needed to protect himself. Jake always has known that Rufus would inherit the family company. It was a successful company providing the aircraft industry with specially designed parts when the need arose that the aircraft had to perform above the guaranteed safety levels. Jake had a PhD in aeronautics and a master's in industrial design. He was groomed by his grandfather to be the future technical executive officer. That was until his father took over the company. He shoved Jake aside. Jake suspected that his brother had a firm hand in it, but he didn't care. He already had more work than he could handle. When his father fired him on a technicality, he tried to let Jake sign a document to prevent him working for the competition. Jake laughed out loud in his face, walked out, kissed his father's secretary, and sang the words from Tommy by The Who, "I'm free. I'm free. And freedom tastes of reality." Walking out of the house. When the biggest competitor got wind of Jake's layoff, they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. He took it with both hands. Now he worked 28 hours a week for the same salary as he had at his father's company, working full-time. The benefits were way better too. Because Jake was aware that his father and brother would want him out of the way, and he had expected this to happen already some years earlier. On advice of his grandfather, he started his own company and based it in Luxembourg. All his freelance jobs ran through that company. The proceeds went for a major part into an internet offshore account in one of the other tax havens in Europe. The other, smaller, part went into his normal account. Brooke never asked where the extra money came from, just that Jake did some work on the side to generate extra money. Suddenly this setup became very convenient. He changed his instructions so that all that money went into the offshore account. He had absolutely no intention to stop his freelance work. It wasn't even feasible legally. There were contracts to reckon with. In his office he decided that he needed more quality time with his children and therefore to stop working these ungodly hours. Next morning Jake was reading the newspaper on his tablet, having his usual cup of coffee, when Brooke entered the kitchen. "Where were you all night? I've been waiting for you." "Sure, for about 5 minutes and then you went to sleep. Cynicism doesn't suit you. Tell me all about it. But before you go off the deep end, I need to say a few words." Brooke swallowed a venomous comeback. Instead, she said acerbically, "Really, well, the floor is yours." Jake said, "Did you realize that yesterday I worked about 30 days of 15 hours without one day off? I did so, just to cater to your demands, and you just keep asking for more. I haven't seen the kids for more than 4 hours in that time, and that changes now. I returned all my freelance assignments back to the clients. I now work 30 hours a week. No more. If you want more, you find a job and work for it." He was silent for a few seconds, and when Brooke started, he held up his hand. "I'm not finished. He spoke. I think your behavior towards me is appalling, and when you keep that up, we're heading for a divorce. The ball is in your court. I'm going out, having a breakfast that I didn't make myself for a change. Jake walked out of the kitchen before Brooke could utter a word. She was just looking at the door, sitting with her mouth open. She never, ever had Jake seen behaving like this. She took her phone out and called Rufus. Rufus, Jake is becoming obstinate. I don't know how to handle him anymore. Rufus chuckled. It was something I expected. I have a plan B. Jake was behind his desk when his secretary called to say that he had a visitor. Surprised, he asked her if he had any appointments that day he wasn't aware of. No sir, but she said it's urgent, was the reply. Jake sighed. He could handle another problem. Since he gave Brooke the ultimatum, things were deteriorating rapidly. Her ultimatum was, no money, no pussy. And his reply? Have it your way, and moved his things into the guest room. That was something Brooke didn't like at all. She had a high sex drive matching Jake's libido, but Jake had a lot more self-control. Rufus was completely useless. He could get it up, with help of the famous little blue pills, but not long enough to satisfy her needs. Combined with the appalling physical condition he was in, Brooke had to do all the work without the release she so craved. Within 2 weeks she was climbing the walls and tried, in vain, to seduce Jake into submission. Back to the problem. The elderly woman walked into his office and asked to identify himself. When done, she handed him 2 sealed envelopes, saying, I'm very sorry to say that you have been served. The woman walked out shaking her head and telling the secretary, please keep an eye on him. It's really very bad news. Jake looked at the envelopes. Somehow, he felt relieved. The die was now cast. He expected it, but it still hurts like hell. What he didn't expect was the restraining order that forbade him to contact his wife, children, and parents. What really shocked him was the notarized affidavit that stated that he had a sexual relationship with Gemma Evans. With enormous pain in his heart, he started the necessary processes. Of course, the bank accounts were blocked. He delved into his professional relations to see whether there was a lawyer among them. There wasn't, but one client went through the same ordeal Jake now was in and directed him to her lawyer. Lastly, he leased a small flat, just enough for the immediate future. Back to the present. Brooke became aware of Olivia and Brian discussing something. Their voices were hushed, but not enough for Brooke to hear what they were saying. It seems that her son was having a problem and he was wishing that he could talk to his dad about it. Brooke interrupted, why, if you have a problem, don't you talk with your uncle Rufus about it? Olivia scoffed, what could that sweaty fat blob of a pervert possibly say that is even remotely sensible? Brooke was taken aback and was insulted by proxy. She bit on her tongue to prevent telling them who the real father was. What? He is your uncle, mind you. Yeah, quite an uncle. Offering me money to show my tits and telling me that he will reward me handsomely if I help him to relieve his urges. And that's not how he asked for it. Her daughter replied, disgusted. Appalled, Brooke thought, it's his own daughter for Pete's sake and he knows it. If this is true, what she tells me. Oh Lord, help me. That evening a lot of bodies came out of the closet. Brooke had no other alternative than to conclude that Rufus was a pervert and a danger to her and his own children. That nothing happened, yet, was due to the self-respect Jake had ingrained into the children. Now the fact that shortly she would be dependent on Rufus for her income and her lifestyle became a major problem. Jake paid a huge amount of money for child support. It made her relatively well-to-do and never failed a payment, but that wouldn't last much longer. She found herself in a bind and started to regret some of her decisions now. Leonard Daltrey, pleased to meet you, at last. Gemma Evans, and the feeling is mutual. I heard a lot about you, and all was positive. I'm really looking forward to working with you. Professor Daltrey told Gemma the ups and downs of the university and his role in it. He also told her that he was a widower and was living together with his girlfriend. The welcoming interview ended with Professor Daltrey saying, "I've arranged provisional housing with a good friend of mine, Nathaniel Thompson. He lives at St. Christopher's Path and has a guest house. Would you like something more comfortable? I advise you to check out the houses at St. Christopher's Wood. There are some houses available around the lake and some plots of land with a building permit for employees of the university, though I might say that the best plot has been taken by our part-time amanuensis." The professor looked wistfully and continued, "Maybe I'll recruit you. The man is exceedingly good with children that are not very gifted or have behavioral or learning problems. We recently had a special training center set up. He helped to design it to enable these children to develop their full potential. I would like, very much so, that he would also become one of the teachers there. The man, however, is very private. Making contact is not something he encourages, and up till now he has declined my offers." Gemma was exploring the area around St. Christopher's Wood. After 2 months of acclimatizing, she decided that this was exactly where she wanted to be for a prolonged time and started looking for a proper house. Nadia Thompson accompanied her. Suddenly they walked up to a sign. Written on it, "Land for sale." Underneath in smaller letters, "Building permit already granted." Gemma cried out, "What a beautiful place! I can easily live here. But who's going to design a house that fits in these surroundings, let alone build it?" Nadia grinned, "I know just the guy. He is becoming a good friend of ours. He is an aeronautical engineer and a designer. You should see the house he designed for himself, and he is building it all by himself too. He is a bit of a recluse, but when he thaws out, he is actually very good company. I'll invite him to dinner on Friday. You can meet him then, if you want to, of course." "I'd be delighted," Gemma replied happily. Meanwhile, at the Van Dam residence. "Grandad?" Brooke asked in a little voice. Rufus Van Dam Sr. scrutinized the face of the woman across his desk. The mother of his great-grandchildren, only sired by the wrong man. He was a sharp observer of human emotions, and he noticed that she was very distraught. "Aunt." "Yes, dear." "What's the matter? Do you happen to know where Jake is?" Brooke asked haltingly. "Dear, I'm not going to answer that question affirmatively or negatively." "Why do you ask? Trouble in paradise?" That question took Brooke by surprise as she almost blurted out, "Yes," but swallowed her tongue just in time. That reaction didn't go unnoticed by the old man. "Time for the axe to fall for this lady." In a steely voice he continued, "Rufus has some very nasty traits in his character, don't you think so? And his addiction to those steroids doesn't help at all." Brooke stammered, "I don't know what you mean, honestly." Rufus Sr. lashed out. "Don't play games with me, young lady. I may be old, but far from senile as my son and eldest grandson like to think. I know that those two adorable children of yours don't share Jake's genes." "What? How dare you?" Brooke shouted. "Don't take tone with me, young lady. I'm willing to bet my whole fortune on it. What color eyes do you have?" "Blue." "And Jake?" "Green." "And both of your children?" "Brown." "Well now. That is genetically almost impossible. They look like they're Jake's because Rufus and Jake used to look like each other too. But Rufus has brown eyes and you have spent a lot of time in his bed." Brooke felt the world collapse under her. She gripped the chair backs until her fingers were white. She tried to say something, but her tongue refused to comply. Granddad was relentless, "You're on your own. You threw yourself completely to the mercy of the wrong man. You let him manipulate the good one out of your life and that of your children. Now that the outcome isn't what you expected, you want Jake back in the saddle? Whether I know or don't know where Jake is, I'm not going to help you. Now get out." With Brooke gone, Rufus Sr. stood in front of the window for a long time, thinking, maybe it's time for me to write that long letter. Two women were becoming friends since Gemma rented the guest house from the Thompson pair, but, until now, she was never invited into their house. While she waited for her knock on the door to be answered, she looked around. She felt a bit nervous. The door opened. "Oh, hi. You must be Gemma. I am Nathaniel, but everyone calls me Nathan. Only Nadia, when she is angry at me, ever calls me Nathaniel. Come in. Nadia is in the kitchen." Gemma was a bit shocked when she saw the scar running along what, otherwise, would have been a handsome face. When he turned around to show her to the kitchen, she noticed he was very fit, but walked with a slight limp. What happened to him? In the kitchen, she was warmly received. Gemma introduced herself to Jacob, their little boy, and then said to Nadia, "This house and its surroundings are absolutely stunning. How did you find such a jewel?" Nadia's face fell for a short moment while their whole history flashed by her mind and she was thinking what to say. That's a long and sad story, but with a happy ending, I might say. I will tell you sometime, but because it's Nathan's story too, I need his blessing to tell it. It's not common knowledge, only a few people know it all. For now, I can just say that Nathan wrestled it out of the hands of the local tyrants and destroyed them in the process. And Jacob isn't mine. He's Nathan's with his first wife. Is he divorced? Before he met you? No, he is a widower. But I'm very happy to tell you that within 6 months Jacob will not be the only child in this house anymore. Gemma hugged Nadia, gushing, "That's wonderful news." She wanted to ask when the baby was due when Nathan interrupted, "Gemma, may I introduce Jake?" Gemma cried. Without a thought, she ran over and hugged him. Jake didn't react, but for Gemma, long time, no see. Confused, Gemma let go of him. Nadia and Nathan looked at each other and Nathan asked, "Do you know each other?" Before Gemma could say anything, Jake replied, "We used to be friends." Gemma's happiness crashed and tears sprung in the corners of her eyes. This was not the happy reunion she had envisioned. She cried dismayed, "Jake, why are you acting so coldly? Aren't you happy to see me? I missed you so much." Jake was surprised and even more confused. He looked at his hosts. Nathan just nodded and said, "Best get it out of the way immediately. You can use the office over there." Seated in the office, Jake looked at his former and now very distraught friend. "Gemma," he said, "you told Brooke that you had sex with me while I was married to her. You even signed an affidavit for it. That was the end of my marriage. Why would I be happy to see you? That lie hurt me no end." Suddenly it dawned on Gemma and how deep the deception went. She became outraged at Brooke for all the manipulation she did in order to destroy Jake and Jake's image in the community where he had lived. She sat straight and with a steely determination in her voice she said to Jake, "I want you to listen very carefully. Before I came here, I was in Europe for 3 years. I never would have told her that. I heard Brooke bragging about it in a pub and I set her straight, publicly, there and then. After that I went to your parents to tell them where I'd been the last 3 years. I talked with your granddad too. We had a good, long talk together. He was the one that told me that you were doing good and that it was likely that I would run into you here. I didn't suspect that it would be so soon and had already decided to go and look for you. I really missed you, honestly." Jake blanched. "But the affidavit is forged. And if you still have the original, someone is going to be in a mountain of trouble. Jake, I loved you, I still do, but I would never go to bed with you when you were still a married man. I'd never do that to you. All that time I was thinking that you betrayed me and wondered what I had done to you to deserve that. You do believe me then?" "Of course. You provided me with at least one verifiable fact just one call away to my grandfather. I reckon that you can prove the rest as easily. Most important is that in the past you never lied to me. So, yes, I believe you." Gemma felt relieved. That hurdle was taken. Next one, how to get across her feelings for him. And will he reciprocate those feelings? She swallowed and gathered all her courage, asking, "Can we kiss and make up?" While pushing her chair back. Jake did the same, walked over to her, took her in his arms, asking, "Can you forgive me?" "For what?" Gemma asked indignantly. "You were being manipulated in the worst way. There is nothing to forgive. Jake wanted to kiss Gemma on her cheek, but Gemma quickly turned her head and her lips met his. Her hand went behind his head to hold him there, and quickly she caressed his lips with her tongue. After doing that, she broke off the kiss, smiling widely. Jake felt overwhelmed. Did you just kiss me? Did this really happen? You just kissed me? He asked her. Yes. I wanted that since I heard that you weren't married to that harlot anymore. I told Brooke already that I lay a claim to you. Just tell me when I'm going too fast. But slow, or fast, I'm coming after you. Jake pondered this while relishing the feel of Gemma's supple body against his. You know that I'm damaged goods, don't you? There are reasons that I'm building my house on such a remote spot. I can only do slowly. I needed to heal first and never had the courage to confront my demons. It's too painful. Let me in, I'll be at your side. Always. I know that you married that harlot because she was pregnant, otherwise you would be married to me, and to make things worse, I did some math and I wonder if your son is yours. Something is very odd about it. Now, it's time to join our hosts. A last piece of advice: if you want to take it, accept the job offer from Professor Daltrey. It will do you a world of good. When they returned, Gemma said simply, problem solved. He is mine now, even though he isn't completely convinced yet. Nadia clapped her hands in glee, good. That was quick work. What's next? Gemma leaned into Jake and pulled him against her. She smiled and replied with profound happiness in her voice, I have plans. One pertains to retribution, another is, not letting this hunk here out of my sight ever again, and lastly, who do I contact in order to obtain that plot of land we saw this afternoon? Dinner was a spectacular success with lots of merriment. Gemma had been telling anecdotes from the time they were friends. After dinner it became more serious, with Gemma finally asking the hard question, Jake, did that harlot explain how she birthed a fully developed son after a pregnancy of 6.5 months? She didn't. You forget that I was there and so in awe that I never realized that. In hindsight, it was very stupid of me. But what are you implicating? Nathan, knowing from experience how overwhelming witnessing a birth can be, answered gently that it might not be yours and that you've been set up. But they look like me and they look like brother and sister as well, no doubt about that too. Both. Jake broke off his sentence, afraid to voice his train of thoughts. Immediately 2 women crashed into him, holding him and whispering quieting words into his ears. Jake pulled himself together and asked, what now? I need to know for certain. Nadia took a hand and asked, can you think of a man who looks like you? A cousin perhaps? Gemma cried, Rufus. It has to be him. Jake said, nah, they don't even like each other. Nadia made short work of that. Or it was a spiel to keep you from suspecting them. I think there is only one way to find out, and that is an official paternity test. That means that you need a heck of a lawyer, and I know just the one, Donna Marshall. She is not one of the best, but the best of all. Nathan, can you call her? Brooke was having a bad time. 2 weeks after that, Jake's grandfather told her in no uncertain words that he wasn't going to help her in any way to find Jake. She still couldn't find herself a way out of this mess. She didn't want her children exposed to Rufus anymore, but she still needed him, if only for the money he provided. She was preparing dinner while the children were working at their school assignments when there was a knock on the door. She looked through the little window and saw a man and a woman standing on the other side of the door. She opened it and asked, what can I do for you? The woman asked, are you Mrs. Paquette? Mrs. Brooke Paquette, formerly married to Mr. Jacob Randall Van Dam? Yes. What is the matter? Now the man replied, I have a warrant. We need to take DNA samples of your children. Not adhering to that warrant will lead to an arrest. What? Who? Why do you need DNA from my children? For a paternity test. The woman said simply, and thus dropped the ground from under Brooke's world. Brooke always had a vague hope that the children could be the only reason for Jake to come back to her. Another, very big reason was that Jake paid a hefty amount of child support. If he found out that the children were not his, that would stop immediately, and she would lose her comfortable lifestyle. Meanwhile, at the Van Dam residence, another pair of medics, accompanied by a police officer, were knocking on the door of Rufus Van Dam's apartment. Rufus Sr. witnessed it all, thinking, "It seems that Gemma found Jake and Jake has figured it out. Now there will be hell to pay." Rufus Jr. refused to cooperate and attacked the police officer. The obese man was no match for the young strong man, and soon Rufus Sr. witnessed his grandson taking a short and humiliating walk to the police car. 2 weeks later. Jake. The results have arrived. Gemma shouted through Jake's apartment. Gemma dreaded the results. Either way, it would be very difficult for Jake. Gemma had her work cut out supporting him. Jake and Gemma sat on the couch and Jake read the document and attached lab results. When he was finished, Gemma saw he was white and suddenly she became very concerned. "Jake," she asked, "what's wrong? You look like you're having a heart attack." "I'm not having a heart attack, but I'm going to cause some. Both children are Rufus's and he and that cheating bitch of an ex-wife are going to pay me back and some more, for everything they did to me." Gemma nestled herself under Jake's arm in an attempt to calm him. He felt wonderful against her and she hoped it would be the other way around too. Jake still hadn't responded to her overtures. They had cuddled and occasionally there was the chaste peck on the cheek, but nothing more. By now, Gemma felt her knees sloshing against her back teeth. She looked at his face and suddenly Jake looked back at her with a vulnerable and shy look in his eyes. "Gemma, please don't get me wrong. I love you with all my heart and I'm beating myself up for letting myself be reeled in by Brooke when you were away. I know that you need and want more than I can give at this moment. Please believe me when I say that those feelings are mutual. Only before I give myself completely, I need to have this situation resolved and I promise that I will resolve this. I will resolve this the hard way and I don't want you in the thick of it. Also, if we start now, I feel you will be a rebound and that doesn't do justice to you and for your feelings for me. I can completely understand if you don't have the patience for all this and want to be free. Just tell me and we part without hard feelings on my part." Relief washed over Gemma like a cool shower after a hot and tiring day. She knew from the past how difficult it was for the shy man to voice his deepest emotions and was acutely aware of the profound love supporting those words. She gave herself a few seconds to bask in these feelings. Gemma freed her hand from behind Jake's back and used it to pull his head down, and she kissed him like she had kissed no man before. Soft, with just the lightest touch of her tongue against his lips and with all the love she had to give to this gentle and beautiful man. For Jake it felt as if he had a 9-volt battery against his lips. He was shocked in more than one way. The first was obvious and the second was that Gemma didn't want to take the escape he offered. She softly said with her lips almost against his, "Nonsense, Jake. No more excuses. You don't get rid of me that easily now. You just professed your love for me. You will find me in the thick of it every second because I'll be right beside you to support and help you." Jake wrapped his arms around Gemma. Kissed her on her head, thinking, "My lord, is she smelling good?" And whispered shyly, "Can you postpone building your house until this mess is resolved one way or another? You might not need it anymore by then. I can just as easily upgrade and expand my house to your wishes." Gemma was stunned. Did he just ask me to come and live with him? She decided to ask. "It sounds like an invitation to come and live with you?" "It is. You just committed yourself to me and I want you to know that I am just so committed to you. If you want a ring and the appropriate ceremony that comes with it, I'll oblige. But for me, marriage is a hollow phrase. If we tell each other that we're a faithful couple for life and jump over a broom, it's just as valid to me. Yes. I want a ring. I want a ring as the symbol it always stood for in all its simplicity. So, I want a small, simple, plain, unadorned golden wedding ring and I would like you to have exactly the same one. I'll fetch a broom as soon as your retribution has been paid. Equals. Later that week, Jake and Gemma were sitting in Donna Marshall's office while Jake explained that he wanted payback, the napalm way. Donna patiently explained that she wasn't suited to help. Jake needed a shark, a bull shark to be precise. Able to navigate murky waters and pounce unexpectedly and effectively. However, Donna knew someone, a colleague, who has been in a similar situation like he was in now and despises those parasites who were doing that to others. Her promoter introduced him to her, and since they referred clients to each other, or worked together on some cases. Sometime later, Brooke was doing household chores and thinking that since the DNA tests there hadn't been any reaction. Carefully she started to get her hopes up that it would blow over. She had found ways to keep her children away from under the direct influence of Rufus, and their grandfather helped a lot after she took Rufus Sr. in confidence. It seemed that Rufus the younger was rather afraid of Rufus the elder since he was taken away from his apartment by the police. Suddenly her peace of mind was disturbed by some hard knocks on the front door. She went and opened the door, and there stood Rufus. His face was purple and his fat frame was shaking and shivering. He screamed at her, "What's this?" while waving a bunch of crumbled documents in his hand. Brooke took a few steps back. "I don't know." "You tell me." Rufus screamed, "That asshole of a brother is demanding a staggering amount of money from me for raising my children, and to enforce these demands he confiscated all my assets." Brooke staggered into her house and dropped into a chair. Dear God. Jake is awake and on the prowl. Now he knows the children aren't his, there will be hell to pay. If he is coming after me too, I'm fucked twice over. Edmond Dantes will be a teddy bear compared to Jake. She became very afraid now that her luxury lifestyle was at an end. Rufus Jr. was still ranting when there was another knock on the door. Brooke tried to ignore it, but the knocking became increasingly insistent. She sighed deeply when she came out of the chair and walked over to the door. When opening, she saw a little man with a hat, round spectacles, mustache somewhat akin to Professor Calculus from The Adventures of Tintin. Behind him was a woman with a camcorder, the blinking red light showing it active. "Are you Mrs. Brooke Paquette?" he asked. When she answered affirmatively, he handed her an envelope and said, "You have been served. Have a nice day," and walked back to the waiting car. With dread in her heart, Brooke watched them until the car disappeared around the corner. Only then she stepped back, closed the door, turned around and walked to her chair. The dread deepened into a black roiling vortex. She opened the envelope and her fear deepened even more when she looked at the documents. There were DNA tests proving that Jake wasn't the father of either of the children, but his brother was. The next documents were demands for reimbursement for the money she received as child support, including interest and various other demands because she made him think that the children are his and lured him into marriage on false accusations. The demands totaled a staggering amount of money. There was another one from Gemma Evans for falsifying an affidavit and one for slander. Brooke panicked until Rufus told her that the company would pick up the tab for her now the cat was out of the bag. She was the mother of his children after all, wasn't she? Later that evening, Brooke attended the family dinner. Rufus Jr. started to explain that they developed feelings for each other, and Brooke was his girlfriend now. He would take care of the children after their lawyers staved off the ridiculous demands of his idiot cheating brother and his whore. Softly his grandfather butted in. "You have to find your own lawyer. The company is not going to pay for you and your cheating girlfriend's deceit. Jake has suffered enough by your hands." Silence descended at the table. "What?" Jake's father shouted, "Why not? He's allowed to defend himself against those ludicrous allegations, isn't he? The company has very able lawyers to counter this slander." Rufus Sr. retort. First, the allegations are not ludicrous, they're completely true. The kids are from Rufus and Brooke. They've been cheating on Jake from the beginning, and it seems that Jake has DNA proof that the children are not his, but Rufus. If so, Jake has a valid point. Also, the company has strict rules about fraternization, and you broke them all. So, if the lawyers are going to put to work, it's not to fight Jake, but to enforce the rules of the company Rufus broke for about as long as Jake was married to Brooke. Rufus' father exploded, "You can't do that. I'm the CEO, not you." Rufus Sr. softly laughed and answered, "But I hold 70% of the shares of this company. I am the chairman of the board of directors. The board of directors can dismiss any decision the CEO makes. Ergo, our legal team is not to be used for a lost battle against a lawsuit only to satisfy your ego. Rufus Jr. exploded with rage, kicked his chair through the room and walked out of the room. Arriving in the hallway, he stood still, panting and trying to gather his breath. Rufus Sr. dropped his napkin, excused himself and walked after Jr. out of the dining room. In the hallway, he almost felt sorry for the wreck of what was once a man, until he remembered what he did to his brother. He walked past and said softly but in an unmistakable venomous steely voice, "If I find out that you try to fuck over your brother once more, I'm going to bury you so deep that even the devil can't find you. Do you understand?" Rufus Jr. was shortly taken aback by the attack. Quickly thereafter his ego and arrogance asserted themselves and he growled back, "And how do you think to accomplish that, old man? I have influential friends too, you know. Just try me and you will find out that this old dog still can bite." With that, Jake's grandfather walked past and lightly patted the still heavy-breathing man on the back, saying, "Tsk, you must do something about that condition of yours, otherwise you'll never get old." In his apartment he sat behind his desk, took his old and trusted Rolodex and looked up the phone number of the University of St. Christopher's Crossing. The next morning, at breakfast, Rufus Sr. was besieged by his son Randall and Rufus Jr. to let them use the legal advisors of the company. After a long hard look at the documentation, they both understood that this legal battle would be a costly one and the only way to win was to fight as long as possible in the hope that finances would run out for Jake. Alas for them, the old man stuck to his decision and even reinforced it, saying, "If I only have an inkling that you even asked a lawyer, in the employ of the company, for advice, you're fired and, on the street, before you realize what happened. It's an abuse of company assets. Understood?" He bit at the two men while he walked out of the dining room. Behind his desk he called the university. "Good morning, this is Professor Van Dam. I'd like a word with Professor Daltrey. If he can spare the time, I would be much obliged." Within minutes he heard the familiar voice saying, "Rufus, old friend. I haven't heard your voice for too long. How are you doing?" Rufus Sr. smiled, but replied gravely, "Mentally, I'm doing good. Physically, not so. But that's for a later time. I need a favor, one favor that concerns two people. Always, my friend. You stood by me with that unsavory affair with that short fellow, blackmailing students at the university into his bed to get their paper passed. You've always had my back. Now I can return the favor. I don't think that you are going to like it, Leon. I will come and visit you and try to steal 2 of your employees for my company. I don't have another choice anymore." "Which 2? "Jake Van Dam and Gemma Evans." "Ouch," Leon said. "I understand your grandson, but Ms. Evans?" "I had a chat with Ms. Evans and she told me that she heard some rumors concerning Jake's marriage and some foul play. She came to the house to rectify that and told me that she wanted to search for Jake now he was divorced. Witnessing the commotion in my family, she has found him and I seriously expect them to be joined at the hip by now." "You wouldn't be wrong. When will I see you?" I ask, so I can make them available when you want to speak with them. "It's a 2-hour drive? I can leave within half an hour. I'd like you to attend too. Is that possible?" "I'll make it possible." "You seem in a hurry." "I am," Rufus Sr. simply answered. "See you in a few hours." Later that day, Leon was appalled about the appearance of his old friend. He looked frail and tired, but his voice was strong and his eyes still sparkled. Before Leon invited Jake and Gemma to his office, the older men had an intense conversation. Jake, Gemma, Leon and Rufus Sr. were sitting in Leon's office. The reunion of Jake and his grandfather was bittersweet. Regret that it had taken so long to meet, and happiness because they could embrace each other again. Introductions were not necessary. Rufus Sr. kicked off immediately. "Jake, do you want to come and run the company for me?" Stunned, Jake asked, "But Granddad, why, and what about Dad and Rufus?" Rufus showed a sad smile when he answered, "I am ill, and that illness is progressive. I am now entering the stage that I might not be able to fend off the terrible twosome who are now running and ruining my company. I know firsthand that you can lead the company. I've seen you at work." Jake looked shocked and grabbed Gemma's hand. I don't know what to say. Why didn't you tell me? I have my reasons, Jake. But can you answer my question? Of course, your girlfriend must agree as well. But I'm building a house, a family house, here for us both, Granddad. Gemma's head shot up and she looked at Jake. A family house? Who's talking about taking it slow now? Jokingly she interrupted, do you want me to stop with the pill? Without missing a beat, Jake replied, as soon as possible, I'd like to have a few children of my own, if you're willing to help me with that. Gemma flew out of her chair and kissed Jake hard in front of the other two men, saying, I took the last one yesterday evening. Is that answer enough for you? Rufus's voice broke through the happy intermezzo. Jake and Gemma, may I remind you that you still are in company? Oh, and Jake, the company's offices are less than an hour's drive from here. Jake looked Gemma in the eyes. Gemma nodded, barely perceptive, to Jake to accept Rufus' offer to run the company. Jake turned to his grandfather. Remains the question, what about my father and brother? Leave that to me. When you take over, they won't be able to make it difficult for you anymore. You're not the only one who holds a grudge. When do you want me to take over? So, you'll do it? Running the company? That makes me so happy. Yes, Granddad, we'll do it. But when? I'm at the end of my life. Soon the symptoms will be visible and the pain will be unmanageable. Since Leon witnessed his wife dying a horrible death, he founded, together with some other people, a small private clinic where the passing from life will be eased. I plan to go there in about 10 days. Soon after that, I suppose. Jake was silently thinking when Gemma asked, but why all the cloak and dagger stuff? I suspect that Randall and Rufus will go to any lengths to keep their lifestyle, that includes violence. Jake already is a pain in the butt for Rufus, and I already had to threaten him because he wanted to use the company's lawyer office to fight the lawsuits Jake initiated. Leon interrupted, we came up with a battle plan to protect you two from Randall and Rufus. He looked at his old friend and asked, shall I do the honors, or do you want to? Rufus Sr. replied, you do that, I'm becoming tired. Leon continued, as soon as Rufus has passed away, a message will be sent to some of the trusted managers in the office, the workshop and the factory of the company. They will put the whole company in lockdown. I will write a small software package, akin the infamous ransomware, to enable that. Employees will be sent home for the duration, of course on full pay. We've made provisions for this. Jake and Gemma were taken aback by the scope of it all. Jake asked, and us? What is our role in this? Of course, you will be informed as well, but you don't have to do anything until the reading of the will. There all will be revealed, and you can take over the company. By then Randall and Rufus will be the least of your worries. Jake's grandfather sighed tiredly. That already has been taken care of. He looked up at Jake and said, I'll write you a letter to explain everything. For now, it's best that you remain ignorant about everything that is put in motion. Granddad, will you let me visit you in the clinic? Jake asked with a quiver in his voice. No, son, it's best to leave me be. It will not be a pretty sight, and I want to be alone when I'm going to meet my maker. This is goodbye for us. One last question though, please take good care of your mother. She is, just like you, an innocent bystander. I promise, grandfather. We'll take care of Mum. With that they said their goodbyes, and a very emotional Jake, with Gemma, in tow, left for home. At Jake's apartment it took a while to process this sad news for both Jake and Gemma. After a while, with a deep sigh, Jake said, I'm going to miss the old man. He was like a father to me, much more so than my father ever was. He only had eyes for Rufus. The only answer Gemma could give was a hug and a kiss, saying, I know. 2 weeks later. Jake had just finished negotiations with a contractor to finish his, now their house in the woods. When the sad news came. He wanted to have the house done sooner rather than later, and Nathan recommended this one as fast, quality-driven and reliable. After the decision to stay together, Jake had redesigned the house and enlarged it considerably. Now it would become a house with 5 bedrooms, 2 living rooms with all that came with it. The house would be heated with deep geothermal heating, and energy would come from a bank of solar panels and 2 wind turbines. Jake sat in front of the house with the sad news in his hands when Gemma arrived. She tried to console him but only partly succeeded. Jake said he felt as if something was cut away from him. The next day came the summons of the lawyer handling the estate to attend the reading of the will. Jake went with Gemma and had steeled himself for what to come when he noticed that he was being followed by a black sedan. He quickly steered his car into a parking lot next to a mall and wanted to get out when the black car pulled over next to them. A woman got out and gestured to lower his window. Jake did so with the motor running and his foot hovering over the accelerator until the woman showed her ID saying, "Sir, we're FBI and here to protect you until this business is over. When you arrive at the reading, please act as if you don't know we're here. All will be revealed at the reading as per Mr. Van Dam's wishes." Jake entered the conference room, leaving Gemma behind in the waiting room, finding his father, mother and Rufus Jr. already seated. Rufus Jr. sneered, "Look, the prodigal son comes to see if there is something for him to be found here. Well, I'll see to it that you get nothing, little rat." The lawyer interrupted, "Sir, you behave, or I'll have you thrown out." "Understood." Rufus wanted to say another thing but the lawyer, this time very forcefully, said again, "Sir, behave yourself. Next time you can sit outside the building waiting for your family. Now do you understand, and I demand a reply that you do." Rufus muttered something and again the lawyer went in feet first. "I can't hear a word you say. Do you, or don't you understand that your next transgression on the house ethics will have you removed from the premises?" Randall veered up to interrupt but an upheld hand stopped him from doing so. He recognized a man not to be trifled with. "Good, now with the shenanigans out of the way we can start the official part." Jake suddenly was hit with an image. That of Gandalf, the wizard from the Lord of the Rings. The lawyer was such a person. Friendly and gentle, but with a combustible temper for people who tried to provoke him. Suddenly he became hard, unforgiving and swift with retribution. He was pulled back to reality when he heard his name just in time to hear what was read aloud. "That all my possessions as listed with this office are for my only son, Jacob Randall Van Dam, who from now on also will be my successor as chairman of the board of Van Dam Aeronautical Industries." "What? What does Granddad mean with only son? That's Dad, isn't it? What's going on?" Jake thought, bewildered. Jake's mother sat serene in her chair, her lips curled slightly up with a little but content smile on her face while Randall and Rufus exploded. "I'm his son and Rufus is my son. I'm going to tear you up, you fraud." Randall roared at the lawyer. The lawyer didn't even blink and pushed a button. Within seconds the door opened and 4 men appeared. They looked like they could tear the arms from a gorilla without breaking a sweat and took position next to the angry man. One growled to Randall, "You're not going to make me hurt you, will you, mister?" Randall deflated immediately but Rufus, not in possession of much self-restraint, tried to get at Jake shouting, "I'm going to kill you, motherfucker." The next moment he was sitting again. His face betrayed agony while he rubbed his thumb and wrist. Now some modicum of calm was restored. The lawyer went on, "My dear friend Rufus predicted this little unsavory scene. That's why I asked these gentlemen to attend to keep the peace." He looked at Randall and said, "Mr. Van Dam has genetic evidence that you are not his son. He didn't divorce your mother without reasons. Ergo Rufus Jr. isn't his grandson." The lawyer waited a moment to let the message sink in and relentlessly pushed on, while still looking at Randall, "When he became aware how you treated your wife and that you, on company's cost, leased an apartment and had yourself, again on the dime of the company, entertained by ladies from an escort service bureau, he made your wife an offer and she accepted it gladly. He had your wife inseminated with his sperm and she became pregnant with Jacob Randall Van Dam. We have notarized affidavits to that order and, again, genetic proof that the other son of Anna Van Dam Hansen and Rufus Van Dam is Jacob Randall Van Dam." Randall looked like he was about to explode and indeed he did. He lunged at his wife, "You slut. You cheated on me. You're going to pay for that. I'll sell you to a Russian whorehouse. I'll have you killed in the worst way," he screamed. The lawyer interrupted after gesturing to the 2 men to immobilize Randall. At the same time Rufus was doing a very good imitation of a goldfish on dry land. The lawyer said to the men, "Please add this behavior and the threats to the file. And to Randall, you will do no such thing. We have proof of embezzlement on a grand scale by you and your son. You stole from the company about $6 million to provide for your depraved lifestyle, not including the amount of money you both stashed away on the Cayman Islands. You also sold security-sensitive technology to rogue states and competitors. Therefore, some government agencies which are tasked with the security and safety of this country, the IRS and the FBI, are wanting to have an in-depth conversation with the both of you about that. Whether you like it or not, you both are going to help them with their investigations. He looked at the four men, holding Randall and Rufus in their seats, and said, "Will you please be so kind as to accompany these persons to the exit and hand them over to the authorities?" Brooke was waiting outside. She saw Jake walk in with that woman Gemma. Gemma had been as good as her word, witnessing Jake's possessive arm around her. Half an hour later her world collapsed when she saw Rufus and his father being walked out, had them read their rights and whisked away in separate cars. What has happened here? Brooke thought. A few seconds later panic struck and she clamped onto one of the men accompanying the father and son out and handed them over to the police. "I can't say, ma'am, all I can tell you is that they are going to help the authorities with their inquiries and that is going to take a long time," the man said. One of them explained, "It seems that they are wanted for fraud, embezzlement, industrial espionage and passing sensitive technology to sanctioned countries. We won't see them again in the next 20 years, I presume. Who's going to run Van Damme's industries when they are not available?" Brooke asked while the hollow pit in her stomach deepened. The other man. The one who came in with that knocker at his arms. Suddenly Brooke felt unreal. She didn't know what had happened inside the office, but Jake came out on top. The luxury life and the protection against Jake's lawsuit she was promised by Rufus had evaporated. Feeling depressed she walked over to Rufus' car and found it unlocked with the key fob laying in the center console. In turmoil she drove home. Months later. Brooke was at the end of her rope. Her very meager income wasn't nearly enough to provide for the necessities of her household, let alone for the niceties and luxuries she was used to in her, what she called, former life. She now had to find a plan to either increase her income or lower her expenses. The tuition of the children was especially a source of worries. The only way out she could see was trying to get Jake to take care of the children, and that meant that she had to seduce him out of the arms from that harlot again. She stood naked in front of the mirror and failed to notice that her body showed the abuse she had given it. During her time with Rufus, she had been partying hard, drank a lot, and sometimes when she had to service him she took some substances to give her the stamina for the prolonged way she abused her body. At Rufus' insistence she had undergone not a small amount of plastic surgery to tuck in her tummy she had after bearing 2 children, had her breasts firmed up and enlarged, had a facelift and her lips filled up. The overall result was that she lost her natural look that had attracted Jake in the first place. Now she looked like that singer, Cher, but without the healthy glow. Brooke's skin was somewhat loose and artificial. Her breasts were like footballs without the natural jiggle that normally attracted so many men, and her face, belly and legs were the wrong kind of smooth. All this was overlooked by Brooke, and she was confident that she would be able to replace that harlot Gemma without any problems. Early in the morning. Brooke sat in her car. She had it parked strategically so that she could see who would leave the house. If it was Jake, she would drive off and come back another time. If it was that harlot, she would wait a few minutes to ensure that there was little chance that Gemma would return, and then she would go knocking on that door and reclaim her husband. Suddenly she saw the blue Nissan Rogue appear and, in a flash, disappear around the corner. She checked her makeup one more time, waited 5 minutes, stepped out of the car and walked over to the front door. Brooke had heard that Jake designed and partly built the house himself. She forced herself to take a good look so she knew what to compliment on. She could always manipulate him into changing it into something more to her taste. The house seemed to have grown out of the hill. It sat low on the top, the front facing the north. Its rather small face showed 2 large windows next to the door. The blinds closed. Brooke took a deep breath, pulled her shirt a bit down to enhance her cleavage, pulled the door knocker backwards and let go. The knock reverberated through the house and Brooke waited. And waited. Just when she wanted to turn around, the door opened silently and Jake showed himself. He looked her over, his face expressionless, but saying nothing, he was definitely not inviting her in. Brooke squared her shoulders, forcing her breasts to strain against the thin fabric of her blouse, and finally said in a sultry voice, "Hello Jake, you were looking good, life is treating you well, I see." "Brooke, somehow I'd been expecting to hear from you. What do you want?" "I want us to talk." "Aren't you inviting me in?" Jake sighed. "Let's get it over with, for once and for all," he thought. "Come on in then," he replied wearily. He led her into his office. It was closest to the door and he didn't want Brooke to appraise the rest of the house. Jake had a good idea as to why she showed up. He gestured to her to sit and took his chair at the other side of his desk and said, "Okay Brooke, talk. What do you want from me? Aren't you going to show me the rest of the house?" "No, why should I?" "Now, will you tell me why you are here?" "Jake, don't you understand, we belong to each other, we have history and 2 children together. Now I need you to come back to me." Jake looked at Brooke, his mind churning. What is happening here? Is she going bonkers? Out loud he said, "We do have history, indeed. But my recollection of that history seems to differ a hell of a lot than yours. You must be out of your mind, thinking that you and I will ever be together again." Jake's answer didn't seem to faze Brooke one bit. "I'll admit, I made a mistake, but there are still the children to consider. I can't provide for them properly. They're not mine. I have compelling evidence that they are from my half-brother. So, why should I? You raised them for the longest time and did a very good job at it. Rufus had never been able to properly take care of them." Jake sighed and replied, "Don't you worry. I'll take care of them. Only because my mother, their grandmother, asked me to. She begged me to take care of them, so I made provisions for them in such a way that you can't get your greedy hands on the money. I'm definitely not willing to enhance your lifestyle." Brooke became aggravated. This was not how she had envisioned this conversation. Jake had always been malleable to her needs, and she conveniently had forgotten what had happened just before their divorce. Now she ran into a wall. She wanted him to take care of her children and herself. She tried a different approach. "Jake," she crooned, "I know I wronged you, but that was all to the influence of Rufus. Now he is out of the picture, we can be very good for each other. Think about what I can do for you. I know tricks in bed that will blow your mind. Dump that frigid witch and come back to me. We can live the good life. The 4 of us, as the family we were." Jake was silent for a few moments and Brooke thought she was winning the battle. She suggestively changed her posture, crossing her legs so that he could see her crotch, and squared her shoulders, pushing her pumped breasts against the thin fabric of her blouse. It had the opposite effect on the man in front of her. "You're looking and acting like a prostitute. Our history makes me think that I should avoid you at all times. I'm not going to touch you, not even when wearing a hazard suit. As for your children, I arranged living quarters at St. Christopher's Crossing since Olivia will go to college there. Brian will live with his grandmother until he goes to college too. You will not be able to take proper care for him, nor provide proper housing, therefore I took care of that. You, however, will not receive a cent from me. In reality, you have an outstanding debt to me." Jake was silent for a minute and Brooke was absolutely stunned by his outburst. Then he went on, "If you try to fight this, I will file a complaint for fraud and extortion, telling the authorities that the children weren't mine and that you ripped me off during the divorce because of that. Now get out. I've had enough." When Jake fell silent, they both heard the door open. Gemma peeked around the corner and Jake said, "Come on in, my visitor is about to leave." A radiant Gemma with a very obvious baby bump entered. She almost strutted over to Jake and kissed him on his cheek. She whispered softly so that Brooke wasn't able to hear, "My suspicions were correct. There are 2 of them." When Jake's smile got bigger and bigger, Brooke couldn't contain herself anymore. "You are pregnant," she cried out loud, seeing her plans for her and Jake going up in smoke. Gemma and Jake looked at each other and Jake gave an almost imperceptible nod. Gemma turned to Brooke and said, "Yes, I'm pregnant. I'm giving Jake his own children. The children he deserved for such a long time. Now I heard that you were leaving?" We need to make plans, redecorating the room for the children. Suddenly the quarter fell by Brooke. Children? You mean? Gemma's face lit up. Yes, I'm bearing twins. I'm 3 months pregnant. I became suspicious when my belly started to swell so soon. The first echo didn't show both fetuses because one was hiding behind the other. This echo showed two and their gender. She kissed Jake hard on his lips and whispered, "Boys." Brooke said, "You can't do that to me," throwing me to the curb, taking away my children, your niece and nephew. Jake thought it time to drop all pretenses of civility and replied in a tone Brooke knew too well, but Gemma had to experience yet. "I don't know what Olivia and Brian are to me." You tell me, and bear in mind that Randall wasn't the biological son of Rufus Sr. and I'm not the biological son of Randall, but from Rufus Sr. we share the same mother though. Since Randall and Rufus Jr. were arrested, Brooke hadn't talked to them. Anna refused any rapprochement and wanted to have nothing to do with her. It dawned on Brooke that she was well and truly isolated and left to her own. She had no decent work, lived in a sleazy apartment for which she had to sell her valuables, one at a time. She let her head hang down and almost missed that Jake was talking again. "If it was up to me, you can rot in hell. But my mother and Gemma are convinced that if I do that, you'll be a quivering diseased wreck of a human being. I don't mind that, but again they told me that you are still the mother of your children and they might feel obliged to take care of you, and that would come at a cost I don't want them to pay. Therefore, I arranged a job for you. Simple physical work. It will pay for the rent and the basic cost of living." Brooke had already applied for several jobs, only to be rejected firsthand every time. To get a job she would have to look somewhere far away and she wouldn't be able to see her children at all. Jake handed her a card with an address and a telephone number, while Gemma said, "This is your one and only chance to keep in contact with your children because it's the only job there is for you after the lawsuits are before the judge. If you don't take it, we will withdraw our hands from you. And we're not taking your children away. It's by their own choice that Olivia is going to live in St. Christopher's Crossing in Bryan with Anna. They are well aware of what you did to what they thought was their father." Now Gemma gestured to Brooke that it was time to leave. In front of the door she said to Brooke, "In the end I win. I have Jake and I am going to have his babies. Your selfishness ruined Jake for you, you gambled on the wrong man for some perceived luxury. I have the better man and you have nothing." Gemma gave Brooke a hard look and continued, "I warn you. If you try something with Jake, you'll find me in your way. If you try to manipulate your children and try to set them up against him or hurt Jake in whatever way, I'm coming for you and I will not stop until you are completely destroyed. Do you understand?" Brooke's mouth fell open by the unveiled threats and the raw animosity Gemma exuded. "Answer me. Do you understand? You've hurt Jake enough and this will stop here and now. Do you understand what I am saying?" Brooke said very forcefully, almost shouting. In a small voice Brooke replied, "Yes, I understand. No direct contact with Jake, only via you. Yes. And now get out." The Brooke who stood so confident in front of the mirror a few hours ago was no more. During the last 45 minutes her world had crashed. Broken Brooke walked to her car. Inside, Gemma snuggled herself in Jake's lap. She sighed, "You're mine. It took me almost 20 years to get here, but we are together again." Despite Brooke and thanks to her stupidity. After a moment she got on her feet, pulled Jake with her saying, "We need to practice." "Practice? What for?" Jake asked. "Number 3, of course." And giggling she pulled him to the bedroom.